And welcome back to our third and final audio version, our last section of our ecology text, which is section 3.3, Cycles of Matter. This corresponds to pages 74 through 80, so make sure that you're going through and filling out this worksheet that corresponds to it. You've been given a copy on Classroom. So let's go ahead and jump right into the reading. 3.3, Cycles of Matter. Energy is crucial to an ecosystem, but all organisms need more than energy to survive. They also need water, minerals, and other life-sustaining compounds. In most organisms, more than 95% of the body is made up of just four elements: oxygen, carbon, hydrogen, and nitrogen. Although these four elements are common on Earth, organisms cannot use them unless the elements are in a chemical form that cells can take up. Recycling in the biosphere. Energy and matter move through the biosphere very differently. Unlike the one-way flow of energy, matter is recycled within and between ecosystems. Elements, chemical compounds, and other forms of matter are passed from one organism to another and from one part of the biosphere to another through biogeochemical cycles. As the long word suggests, biogeochemical cycles connect biological, geological, and chemical aspects of the biosphere. Matter can cycle through the biosphere because biological systems do not use up matter, they transform it. The matter is assembled into living tissue or passed out of the body as waste products. Imagine for a moment that you are a carbon atom in a molecule of carbon dioxide, floating in the air of a wetland like the one in figure 3.10. The leaf of a blueberry bush absorbs you during photosynthesis. You become part of a carbohydrate molecule and are used to make fruit. The fruit is eaten by a caribou, and within a few hours you are passed out of the animal's body. You are soon swallowed by a dung beetle, then combined into the body tissue of a hungry shrew, which is then eaten by an owl. Finally, you are released into the atmosphere once again when the owl exhales. Then the cycle starts again. Simply put, biogeochemical cycles pass the same molecules around again and again within the biosphere. Just think, with every breath you take, you inhale hundreds of thousands of oxygen atoms that might have been inhaled by dinosaurs millions of years ago. The water cycle. All living things require water to survive. Where does all this water come from? It moves between the ocean, atmosphere, and land. As figure 3.11 shows, water molecules enter the atmosphere as water vapor, a gas, when they evaporate from the ocean or other bodies of water. The process by which water changes from liquid form to an atmospheric gas is called evaporation. Water can also enter the atmosphere by evaporating from the leaves of plants in the process of transpiration. During the day, the sun heats the atmosphere. As the warm, moist air rises, it cools. Eventually, the water vapor condenses into tiny droplets that form clouds. When the droplets become large enough, the water returns to Earth's surface in the form of precipitation: rain, snow, sleet, or hail. On land, much of the precipitation runs along the surface of the ground until it enters a river or stream that carries the runoff back to an ocean or lake. Rain also seeps into the soil, some of it deeply enough to become groundwater. Water in the soil enters plants through the roots, and the water cycle begins again. Nutrient cycles. The food you eat provides energy and chemicals that keep you alive. All the chemical substances that an organism needs to sustain life are its nutrients. Think of them as the body's chemical building blocks. Primary producers, such as plants, usually obtain nutrients in simple or inorganic forms from their environment. Consumers, such as the monkey in figure 3.12, obtain nutrients by eating other organisms. Every living organism needs nutrients to build tissues and carry out essential life functions. Like water, nutrients are passed between organisms and the environment through biogeochemical cycles. The carbon cycle, nitrogen cycle, and phosphorus cycle are especially important. Note also that oxygen participates in all these cycles by combining with these elements and cycling with them during various parts of their journey. The carbon cycle. Carbon plays many roles. Carbon is a key ingredient of living tissue. In the form of calcium carbonate, CaCO3, carbon is an important component of animal skeletons and is found in several kinds of rocks. Carbon and oxygen form carbon dioxide gas, or CO2, an important component of the atmosphere. Carbon dioxide is taken in by plants during photosynthesis and is given off by both plants and animals during respiration. 4 main types of processes move carbon through its system, or through its cycle. Biological processes, such as photosynthesis, respiration, and decomposition, take up and release carbon and oxygen. Geochemical processes, such as erosion and volcanic activity, release carbon dioxide to the atmosphere and oceans. Mixed biogeochemical processes, such as the burial and decomposition of dead organisms and their conversion under pressure into coal and petroleum, or fossil fuels, store carbon underground. Human activities such as mining, cutting and burning forests, and burning fossil fuels release carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. Scientists identified these processes decades ago, but they are still actively investigating them. For example, how much carbon moves through each part of the cycle? How do other parts of the carbon cycle respond to changes in atmospheric carbon dioxide? How much carbon dioxide can the ocean absorb? Later in this unit, you will learn why answers to these questions are so important. Figure 3.13 shows how these processes move carbon through the atmosphere. In the atmosphere, carbon is present as carbon dioxide gas. Carbon dioxide is released into the atmosphere by volcanic activity, by respiration, by human activities such as the burning of fossil fuels and vegetation, and by the decomposition of organic matter. Plants take in carbon dioxide and use the carbon to build carbohydrates during photosynthesis. The carbohydrates are passed along food webs to animals and other consumers. In the ocean, carbon is also found along with calcium and oxygen in calcium carbonate, which is formed by many marine organisms. Calcium carbonate can also be formed chemically in certain marine environments. This chalky carbon-based compound accumulates in marine sediments and in the bones and shells of organisms. Eventually, these compounds break down and the carbon returns to the atmosphere. The nitrogen cycle. All organisms require nitrogen to make amino acids, which in turn are used to build proteins. Many different forms of nitrogen occur naturally in the biosphere. Nitrogen gas, or N2, makes up 78% of Earth's atmosphere. Nitrogen-containing substances such as ammonia, or NH3, nitrate ions, NO3, and nitrite ions, NO2, are found in the wastes produced by many organisms, and in dead and decaying matter. Nitrogen also exists in several forms in the ocean and other large water bodies. Human activity adds nitrogen to the biosphere in the form of nitrate, a major component of plant fertilizers. Figure 3.14 shows how the different forms of nitrogen cycle through the biosphere. Although nitrogen gas is the most abundant form of nitrogen on Earth, only certain types of bacteria can use this form directly. Such bacteria, which live in the soil and on the roots of plants called legumes, convert nitrogen gas into ammonia in a process known as nitrogen fixation. Other bacteria in the soil convert ammonia into nitrates and nitrites. Once these products are available, producers can use them to make proteins. Consumers then eat the producers and reuse the nitrogen to make their own proteins. When organisms die, decomposers return nitrogen to the soil as ammonia. The ammonia may be taken up again by producers. Other soil bacteria convert nitrates into nitrogen gas in a process called denitrification. This process releases nitrogen into the atmosphere once again. The phosphorus cycle. Phosphorus is essential to living organisms because it forms part of important life-sustaining molecules such as DNA and RNA. Although phosphorus is of great biological importance, it is not very common in the biosphere. Unlike carbon, oxygen, and nitrogen, phosphorus does not enter the atmosphere. Instead, phosphorus remains mostly on land in rock and soil minerals and in ocean sediments. There, phosphorus exists in the form of inorganic phosphate. As the rocks and sediments gradually wear down, phosphate is released. On land, some of the phosphate washes into rivers and streams, where it dissolves. The phosphate eventually makes its way to the oceans, where it is used by marine organisms. As Figure 3.15 shows, some phosphate stays on land and cycles between organisms and the soil. When plants absorb phosphate from the soil or from water, the plants bind the phosphate into organic compounds. Organic phosphate moves through the food web from producers to consumers and to the rest of the ecosystem. Nutrient limitation. Ecologists are often interested in the primary productivity of an ecosystem, which is the rate at which organic matter is created by producers. One factor that controls the primary productivity of an ecosystem is the amount of available nutrients. If a nutrient is in short supply, it will limit an organism's growth. When an ecosystem is limited by a single nutrient that is scarce or cycles very slowly, this substance is called a limiting nutrient. Because they are well aware of this phenomenon, farmers apply fertilizers to their crops to boost their productivity. Fertilizers usually contain 3 important nutrients: nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. These nutrients help plants grow larger and more quickly than they would in unfertilized soil. The open oceans of the world can be considered nutrient-poor environments compared to the land. Seawater contains at most only 0.00005% nitrogen, or 1/10,000th of the amount typically found in soil. In the ocean and other saltwater environments, nitrogen is often the limiting nutrient. In some areas of the ocean, however, silica or even iron can be the limiting nutrient. In streams, lakes, and freshwater environments, phosphorus is typically the limiting nutrient. When an aquatic ecosystem receives a large input of a limiting nutrient, for example, runoff from heavily fertilized fields, the result is often an immediate increase in the amount of algae and other producers. This result is called an algal bloom. Why do algal blooms occur? There are more nutrients available, so the producers can grow and reproduce more quickly. If there are not enough consumers to eat the excess algae, conditions can become so favorable for growth that algae cover the surface of the water. Algal blooms, like the one shown in Figure 3.16, can sometimes disrupt the equilibrium of an ecosystem. All right, everybody, that concludes section 3.3. Have a great day.